I recently rewatched USS Callister, and I also recently finished watching Breaking Bad. Both of those got me thinking that Jesse Plemons is really good at playing psychopathic villains who murder children on a whim. Anyways, USS Callister. This episode is basically the poster child of Black Mirror Season 4, and for good reason. It has far more ambitious visuals than most other episodes, is a pretty high quality one, and seems to be kind of a midpoint of horror for Black Mirror. The other two episodes which fans love this season, Hang the DJ and Black Museum, were both on either end of disturbing, with Hang the DJ having no horror and Black Museum being downright gruesome at points, but USS Callister manages to have just enough terror while not pushing away a large portion of its audience. Alongside the horror aspects, I'd say USS Callister generally just has the most stuff. It's got comedy, it's got a secret plan, it's got drama. This feels like a fully fledged movie and not just a sci-fi TV show episode. But the topic of this video is Robert Daly, the villain and antagonist. This guy is absolutely the standout for me. He's an absolutely deplorable character, and yet it's clear what his motivation is. He is omnipotent and incredibly threatening, and yet is defeated in a believable way. His character shifts are entirely realistic, yet are perfectly woven into the plot. Plus, I generally just think he's devilishly entertaining. So I figured it'd be nice to have a video where we look into this character a bit. Hopefully you guys enjoy. So, take a seat, start pedaling, and let's get straight into analysing. Robert Daly has two sides to him. One is real-world Daly, and the other one is virtual Daly. Real-world Daly is a tech nerd with little to no social skills. He's a shy guy, he wants to make connections with people but just doesn't know the social cues. I guess that's why they call it Black Mirror. Hey, up loneliness! Because he's so antisocial, he ends up being a little mistreated by those around him. Just small stuff, maybe not smiling as much around him or taking over conversations for him. However, he takes these bits of rudeness and considers them as though they're felonies and acts on it as well. This is because Robert Daly is a complete narcissist. He believes that everyone should love him regardless of what he does, and those who don't need to be severely punished. This is where we move into virtual Daly. After a long day of being put down by his workmates, he goes back to his actually pretty nice apartment and logs into a modded version of the game he's been making, Infinity. This mod makes the whole thing look like one of his favorite TV shows, Spacefleet, this episode's stand-in for Star Trek. In this world, Robert Daly captains the ship, telling his crew what to do and going on missions. However, these crew members aren't just NPCs, they're virtual recreations of his work members who mistreat him. These virtual recreations are just as alive as their counterparts, however they exist in a world where Daly is a god. A really angry god. His persona here is constantly changing. He changes his accent, his haircut, his mannerisms. He is primarily a cheesy action hero and only starts letting his true colors show when anyone starts playing up. We'll get more into his true colors soon, but that's essentially all you need to know about Robert Daly. However, I do want to get one thing straight. Daly is the villain in this story, 100%. He's a sociopath who feels no remorse and drives the main conflict of the episode solely because of how douchey he is. Yes, his co-workers do disrespect him quite a bit, but that's zero excuse for the literal torture he inflicts on them throughout the season. The replicas are conscious, can feel pain, have their own thoughts, and operate like humans, and therefore it is immoral to torture them, something Daly does. And he almost certainly knows that the virtual recreations are conscious. He built an entire coding company, for God's sake. He knows what's what when it comes to machines. He isn't doing it digitally because of guilt, he's doing it so he can get out of it scot-free. I like his character solely for analysis purposes, not because I agree with his morals. But with that out of the way, the first thing I'd like to talk about is his motivation. Like any true sociopath, Robert Daly does a lot of pretending. His most obvious persona is in Spacefleet, where he is literally acting as Teemu-branded Captain Kirk, but there are a lot of interesting ones that appear in interesting ways. To start off with, the aforementioned true colors. When people disrespect Daly in the real world, he kind of just bears it. However, when people disrespect him in the game, it's completely different. The best example of this is when Nanette calls him out for being a terrible person, right after she wakes up in the Spacefleet mod. Up until this point, he's been a dyed Han Solo, but as soon as she starts to get on his nerves, he immediately resorts to using coding to make her face disappear. Throughout this scene, his accent and posture slightly start to dissipate, and he starts to show that he believes his ego is the only thing that matters. He uses intimidation not only with his action, but with his words. He does all of this just so Nanette pretends to respect him and does what he says. Him deleting her face is also a perfect way to show how far he is into his self-centered delusion. What's most interesting to me is that he is fully aware that none of the people on the ship respect him. They all hate his mindless games, and everyone who first gets on the ship makes that extremely clear. So, Daly's Spacefleet antics aren't for respect at all. They are for power. Whenever someone is rude to him in the real world, he sees that as them slightly diminishing his real world influence, which means Space Fleet is purely compensation for his lack of power in the real world. This is pretty interesting because it supplies a really strong motivation for the villain. If Daly were to act differently in Space Fleet, he could have been the hero of that world. But his way of comparing general rudeness with years of psychological torture under a malevolent dictator is what makes him a perfect villain. The reason Nanette is there is also a great way of demonstrating his narcissism. When Daly first meets Nanette is when she starts working at the company. She immediately goes to Daly's office, which apparently no one ever does. Hell, he expects she's just trying to find the bathrooms. But no, she was looking for him. She starts praising his work, commenting on his decor, and they both seem to be pretty happy. Despite Walton cutting their meeting short, that doesn't stop Daly getting infatuated by her. She sees him as a genius programmer, while he sees her as someone who's in love with him. This understandably leads to some incredibly creepy moments, most notably when he's eavesdropping on a conversation between Nanette and Shania. He's listening in on Nanette praising all of his work out of sight, and on its own, that's strange, but maybe understandable given how everyone else treats him. But as the conversation goes on, Shania tells Nanette to be cautious around him, since he gets a bit starey, assuming she is romantically interested in him. Nanette corrects her and says that she respects him professionally, and professionally only. As soon as she says this, Daly's entire demeanor changes. His face grows dark, he gets more spiteful, and directly after this, he grabs a DNA sample of her and uploads her into the Space Fleet mod. Simply because she didn't immediately fall in love with him, he sends her to his little pocket dimension. Daly will quite literally do anything to preserve his ego, be it forcing someone to a sightless, suffocating eternity, stealing DNA samples, or reverting someone into a giant monster which I didn't even get to mention, just because they defended their friend. No matter what he does, he is always a perfect person in his eyes who deserves the world, which makes a simple yet vile character. Another thing that's important to bring up is how he uses control to build his threat. The episode utilizes so many tools to make Daly into one of the most threatening villains in Black Mirror. The easiest examples are his scenes. I've already spoken about the defacing of Nanette, but the other great example is Walton's flashback. In this scene, Nanette has just proposed a plan to defeat Daly, but Walton says no. He then goes into a flashback, back when he was the only worker in the Space Fleet mod. Daly was trying to get him to cooperate, but Walton kept resisting. That is until Daly took a DNA sample of his son, brought him to the Space Fleet mod, and made Walton watch as he threw him out of the airlock. If there were any questions about his lack of empathy before, there sure as hell aren't going to be now. This sense of complete and utter ruthlessness not only makes what our heroes are trying to do more heroic, but also builds the overbearing threat Daly poses. The plan that these people eventually create feels like a double or nothing. Either they win and escape Daly's grasp, or they lose and are tortured for eternity. No other options. This obviously isn't the only thing that makes Daly terrifying. The way the Space Fleet crew speak about him is also incredibly well done. The way they stiffen every time he enters the room, the fact that each of them keeps on telling Nanette to let go of every plan she has because the risk is just too great, how far they go into playing their roles during missions. It's basically expert reviews saying do not mess with this guy, and they work really well in keeping his omnipotence even when he's out of the game. His personas also build a very protective barrier of mystery around him. When he's operating Space Fleet, Daly's character is cheesy and fun, but because we know he's hiding something, he's naturally scary. At the end of their first mission, when Nanette slaps him, the fact that his persona remains is so confusing and messes with all preconceived notions we had of him. At times, it seems the Captain persona is the only permanent thing in his life. However, that does mean that when it breaks, it's arguably more creepy. In the scene where Daly confronts his crew about the friend request, it's the first time we see him truly angry in the episode, and so we are terrified about what he's going to do. I mean, he removed all the facial features from a recruit when he was mostly calm and collected. I know I keep bringing that up, but that's insane. The only other time we get to see this break is at the end when he realizes he's been outsmarted by the crew. As the scene goes on, not only does his persona dissipate, but his hair gets steadily messier, symbolizing his ego overtaking him. Also, it just makes him look completely deranged. The way Daly uses fake smiles to hide his true intentions makes him an unpredictable threat, and by the time his true intentions are clear, it's probably too late. So, we've established that he is a massive threat and he's got an incredibly well-written motivation. The last thing I wanted to talk about was the ending of the episode and the way he's defeated, because I think it ties a nice little bow on his character. The ending of the episode does a lot to Daly's character. It's the first time he's outsmarted by his creations, where his facade really starts to slip and actually has his character face some damn consequences. Let's set the scene. The crew have just tried to reach out to real-world Nanette through a friend request, which fails. Daly comes back furious and turns Shania into a bug monster when she tries to defend Nanette. Clearly, the crew are feeling disheartened, but Nanette comes up with another plan. She sees a wormhole in the distance and realizes that it's a doorway to the next Infinity update. If they go through, their code will be deleted and they'll be killed, but at least they'll be able to escape the simulation. In order to do this, the crew hack into Nanette's camera roll, find embarrassing images of her, then use them to blackmail the real Nanette. They then tell her to order a pizza to his door, and while he's distracted with the pizza deliverer, steal all of the DNA samples from his apartment. Meanwhile, in-game, Nanette will have already lured Daly away, and at this point, use his Omnicorder to get the crew to teleport her back up. Once she's up, the crew can then fly to the wormhole. That's such a complicated and yet brilliant plan, and it does so much for the story. Number 1, it's really fun to watch as it unfolds. Number 2, it does even more for Daly's sense of control since we need to do all of that to get away from him. And number 3, it allows for a chase scene between the crew and Daly where emotions can really let loose. The crew are fighting against Daly's reign, and his hair is in utter chaos. I'd have to say that the best scene for this emotion is Walton's sacrifice. After the ship is hit with an asteroid, Walton chooses to sacrifice his body to save everyone else. However, before he goes, he taps into Daly's radio system. Daly is aggressive at first, commanding and trying to control him, until he realizes that Walton is trying to compliment him. Walton goes on about how he wanted to say that he mistreated him, how he truly is a genius, and he took advantage of that. He was going to say that he's sorry. But then Daly threw his child out of an airlock. And with that, he turns on the engine and saves his crew. I think that scene perfectly summarizes Daly's character. Yes, he was constantly disrespected. All of his co-workers were mean to him despite the fact that he built the company they all thrived in. All of the real versions of the people in Space Fleet should realistically owe him an apology. But that does not give him any right to physically and psychologically torture them. He used their meanness as an excuse to heal his wounded pride and kept on taking it too far. He was so close to being an innocent, nice guy, but he decided to go down the sociopath. And ultimately, that makes his defeat feel deserved. When the crew get through the portal, the software detects the mods and restricts his controls, including the control to exit the game. He then has to watch as the world is deleted around him. He presumably dies after a week or so once his human body dies from dehydration or anything like that. When I was first shown a scene from this episode a couple of years ago, it was this one, and I thought that it was harrowing. I thought that was supposed to be the dystopian aspect that makes you think, how horrible. Now, actually seeing the episode, I find myself grinning as a Black Mirror villain fully gets what they deserve for once. It's still well executed, but the emotion is victory rather than fear, which is truly refreshing. Anyways, while this happens, the crew go through the portal, but survive! Instead of being killed, they are sent to the actual unmodded game of Infinity with infinite worlds to explore. This episode is one of the only Black Mirror episodes that has a happy ending, and I'm thrilled to say that. The only other thing that happens is that they meet another player, who is actually a cameo actor. The actor is... Wait, is that Aaron Paul? Okay, so in this episode, Aaron Paul, who plays Jesse Pinkman in Breaking Bad, shows up, and Jesse Plemons, who plays Todd Alquist in Breaking Bad, also shows up. There's Jesse Pinkman, Jesse Plemons, and Todd Alquist, who is played by Jesse, but Jesse Plemons, not Jesse Pinkman, who is played by Aaron Paul. Todd Alquist is played by Jesse Plemons, and not Jesse Pinkman, but actually Jesse Pinkman does play Todd, but in BoJack Horseman, and not Jesse Pinkman, but the actor Aaron Paul, but there he plays Todd Chavez, not Todd Alquist, who is played by Jesse, but not Breaking Bad Jesse. Okay, I think that's enough Jesseception, and probably all I want to say for the video. All in all, Robert Daly is a fantastic villain. His motives are well outlined yet monstrous, he perfectly opposes everything our team of heroes stands for, he's one of the most omnipresent forces in the Black Mirror universe, and he just has a bucket load of memorable scenes. I love hating this guy. Well, if you made it this far, thanks for watching, it means a lot. I've been enjoying these Black Mirror ones and hope to make more. If you have any suggestions in the comments, it might jog my memory of some good ones. Anyways, hope you enjoyed, be careful with your lollipops, cue the outro music.